So is this why automation makes sense in this? Because I remember when I started back in 2000 and somewhere around 2009, 2010, I was going back and forth to Georgia, and I was just like, I drive all the way out here and I do this, and then I do this little drive around and I make sure the property's not burnt down, and then I get to the auction and 90% of the properties I went and looked at had been removed from the list that morning. So it's like, oh my gosh. So I was looking at 20 properties. Now there's only 5 there, and they get bid up to $180,000, like crazy. And just like, okay, I just flew first class from Texas to Florida, spent for a hotel, went out here to do these investments, flew back empty-handed. Like, that was not fun. I mean, well, the trip was fun, but meeting other investors was fun. And there's rules on that when you're meeting other investors, like you can't meet before, you can't say who's going to buy and all that. So when you're going into this market of investing, you got to know what you can and can't do. You can't stand there with your partner and go, hey, you bid on your side, I bid on my side, you bid on this, I'm not going to bid on that, or we'll bump the bids if somebody gets in the middle of us, and we'll kind of just blow them out of the water. Like, there's rules to this stuff. You can't just go out here and, just try and nickel and dime people out of properties, because you can find yourself in court, in jail, fined, or worse, court, jail, and fined, right?
Exactly. That's a great point, because that's something Sherman antitrust. That's where the federal government does have a role, Carl. We talked about like where, how is this controlled? And that is where the federal government will come down on you. They will rain down on you. And there's been more and more crackdowns of that. So I don't mean to digress too much, but you made a very solid point there. And that's something to be aware of, is counties might not necessarily be paying as close attention to that, because they don't really have jurisdictional power. Pardon?
Sometimes counties are the ones that are participating in that collusion.
Yeah, yes. Well, we won't name names, but yes. There's been a lot of negative news, from that regard. But just know that is where the federal government does step in. They will have spies in auctions, watching for collusion. So just be aware of that, all of you out there as investor. So
awesome.
So, as back to your question, Carl, about automation, it's certainly it's a numbers game. If you are attending an auction to buy a very specific property, and that's the only one you looked at, if you are able to walk away with that property, you are a very, very lucky individual. Is 99.9% of the time that is not the case, because like you said, there's a litany of things that can happen between the time that property gets advertised as being in the auction to the time it actually goes to the auction block. It could redeem, right? Or somebody may contact that property owner and offer them a deal to sell their house. They'll pay their taxes. That happens all the time. That property may burn down in that 30 days. There's a bunch of things that can happen. And so the chances of you picking one property, doing research on one property, attending the auction and buying that one property is close to zero. And so, once you find your niche, then it's maximizing the number of properties that you could potentially buy that fit that niche. That is what makes you successful. And if that means broadening that niche beyond your specific county that you live in, or broadening the type of asset that you're willing to buy beyond, the grade AA single family home to maybe include, C grade, rentals, right? Or vacant land. If you've got a model that allows you to maximize the quantity of properties that you could potentially buy, then your chance of success goes up. And that's where automation comes in, right? It's okay. Well, researching one property doesn't take that long. Researching, I'll use Cook County, Illinois, for example, 63,000 properties in their auction lists, doing each one of those by hand. Good luck. Hope you have a lot of time on your hands. It can be done. It's just, it all comes down to how much time you want to spend doing it.
What your time is worth. What is your time worth?
And knowing if you're competing with your others, which is what you're doing, bidding at the auction, somebody else is trying to get a leg up, right? They're trying to be more competitive. And so chances are there's going to be a fairly sophisticated, fund or individual that is using automation. And so if you're not, I mean, that's like showing up to, the Super Bowl with a high school, JV, football team. You're not going to do real well. So it's, again, a long answer to a very basic question, but the true answer is always a little more complicated.
Sure, absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense.
Spoken as a true engineer right there.
Oh, I'm good.
The football language, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Sorry, sister jab.
No, that's okay, jab. So
I'll take it.
So, you guys are actually answering tons of questions like, how is this profitable? You've already answered that. You've already basically broke that down. Understanding and maximizing your risk to reward ratios. I mean, you may not have used those terms, but you basically said, if you go and you're borrowing money or you're pulling money out of your 401k, or you borrow, like I said, you borrow money at, say, I'm gonna give you something crazy. You went and borrowed money at 8%, and then you go into an auction and you go down to a bid down auction where the premium comes down to 4%. You're -6 in a, you're negative in a hole when you start. So that's not, you have to do the math. It's really simple. You have to do the math. Brian made it really clear. You have to find your niche. And once you do, stay in your lane. Don't jump lanes because someone says, oh, guess what? Britney Spears forgot to pay her taxes. And so now we're just going to jump over here and we're just going to go buy her property, because that's probably not going to happen, right? Now, there are situations. I've heard story of Anna Kournikova. She switched accountants. Somehow or another, they didn't include the property taxes. And so it ran up for a year, and she immediately paid it. Someone kind of won big by the time they got to the auction, paid for it and got back. It was redeemed, so they already made their money. But that's a one-off. That's a you went to the ATM, stuck your credit card in, punched in $100, and then spooed out $100,000 by accident. That's a one-off. That's not going to happen every day of the week. That's just not consistent. And that's the thing about investing. It has to be consistent. You don't go to invest in the Wall Street Journal without understanding the fundamentals of a stock. And you don't go looking at stocks without looking at the paper or through automation. Otherwise, it would take you forever to figure out what Google made 3 quarters ago. It would just take you forever, looking at Q10 statements.